Change. Maybe I rely on the old man excuse too often. I don't know. Everybody's always so forgiving. It's like, okay, especially you young people. Older people wouldn't be because they'd know better. Yeah, but you young people are very forgiving in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back live with a Louis B. Free radio show, Brain Food from the Heartland. And as promised, I have Marie on about her book, Dark Obsessions. Marie, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Hi, Louis. Thank you for having me on
Thank
today.
you.
I kind of came at the writing thing a little bit later in life. I was an ardent bibliophile as a child. I read everything that I could get my hands on, and I was always drawn to mysteries and puzzles. So I started out with Encyclopedia Brown, graduated on to Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. Eventually,
Hardy Boys. Wow, I haven't heard that in better part of forever. Wow.
Oh yeah. And then I eventually moved up to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, all of the Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie mysteries. And when I finally reached college age, I had that crossroads decision. Do I pursue writing as a career? And quite honestly, I have to admit, I was too afraid to do it. I wasn't sure if it would pay my bills. So I decided to go the safe route and got a bachelor's degree in business, then went on to get a master's degree in finance and climbed my way up the corporate ladder. And during that process, I learned a lot of things about myself. I learned I could set goals and achieve them. I learned that I could stick with something no matter what kind of adversity came my way. And one day I looked around and I thought, gee, if I could take these skills that have served me so well in the business world and I could adapt them for art, what might happen? And the nice thing about growing older is the fear starts to wane a little bit. The more experiences you have.
Where do you get my age? Where do you get my age?
And I finally realized, if this is something I want to do, what's the worst thing that happens? If I fail, at least I tried. I'll never have to look back and say, what if?
What if? Yeah.
So
I do.
It was really, really a powerful time. And I finally decided to do it and jumped in whole hog to my favorite genre. And here I am today.
When that decision to do it, and I hear what you're saying, because I always, you get my age, you always want to give what I'm not going to say wisdom to the younger people, but your experience. You want to, and you don't want them, the way I always say it, if I know there's a huge pothole down a road, I am going to tell even a stranger, don't go down that road. Or there's an accident or whatever. Of course, you don't want them, just because I went in it and messed up my car, I don't want someone else to do it. So I always tell them, try to minimize regret. Don't, if you want to try something, and I love that what you said, because you felt you had all the tools and you wanted to put them all together and make it happen. And you did. Very successfully, I might add.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of luck goes into the process too. And a lot of kindness of others goes into the process.
Again, I'm not debating luck. I think, but luck, it was hard work. I get the kindness of others. I get that. Perseverance though, right? I mean, again, I'm not being argumentative, Marie, at all. I just think you need to, as the biggest self-deprecator alive, I think you need to give yourself credit. Oh, God, I hope people that know me aren't listening, because they're going to say, Louis, take your own advice. But right, I mean, you applied yourself. You learned the skills. You applied yourself, correct?
That is true. And all of those things are necessary. But I will say, I was fortunate enough to come across the right people in the right ways. And there's probably also parts of that, Louis, where you're right. Do you put yourself with the sports
Yeah.
analogy, did you put yourself in a position to make the play when the opportunity came along? And that comes back to, how important it is, whatever industry you're in, to build up networks around you and join organizations and find ways to put yourself, quote unquote, in a position to make a play.
And by the way, before regular listeners start emailing me, I did understand the sports thing. I'm not a big professional sports guy. I do understand that. I do understand. Of course I understand it. It's not about professional sports, but I get that. Did you put yourself in the position to make the play? And you did. Were there any times when you were writing Dark Obsessions that you kind of lulled? I'm fascinated by the creative writing process, and I've got to say, it's not a disclaimer, but in my early radio days, before I knew there were publicists out there, I'm talking 22-3 years ago, I didn't, I did all nonfiction. I was just, and then as I progressed in radio, I had publicists that would reach out, how about that? And it's like a novel. And my thought was, and I don't mean this mean, it's like, so what do I ask them? How did you write the story that you made up? I guess that's kind of, it's like, and I am fascinated by the ability. I love nonfiction, but I'm fascinated by the ability of someone to create characters. Again, having never written a book, you research and you have to put together a nonfiction book. I get all that, but you're creating a world. And I'm absolutely fascinated by that. Did you ever have a point where you were, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's actually a great question, Louis, because that was part of what I was grappling with for all those years, right? Could I do this? Especially when you're in the business world, which is, when you talk about nonfiction, there is a lot of nonfiction proposals, things that you're writing all the time, analyzing operations, things like that. And when I look back, even, my master's thesis, you're researching and there's known commodities, there's real facts that you're going to analyze, but then you're going to use those facts to support your conclusions and your arguments. And like you said, even though my stories are not science fiction or fantasy, they are fiction. So how do you find these people? And if you do kind of use a science analogy, the decision tree, okay, I've created a detective. Well, what kind of detective is she? And then each one of those decision trees breaks down to the most minuscule level. Does she turn right here? Does she turn left? Does she frown? Does she smile? And what are all of the possible, offshoots of that based on every single decision? So you're right, it is absolutely fascinating. And I did change a bit. The process changed from my first book to my second. And it wasn't something that I did intentionally. It was more where life led me. During my first book, I was able to kind of sit down and write it in a very quick, fast way. In this second book, well, just so many things happened. I moved twice during the process. Unfortunately, I had some family members who became ill, and then there were some end of life situations. And then on top of it, we all went through the pandemic, right? Sure. So there were so many different things and different challenges that came up, but that's where you come back to determination and setting goals and saying, I understand all these things are happening, but I'm coming back to this and I'm going to finish it, and it's going to happen. That's wonderful. It's going to be good.
That's wonderful. When you say that about some of the family illnesses and end of life decisions, they're very, very difficult. I know personally, and when someone that you care about is ill, and when people you care about are dying and die, that's this. The grief, going through the grieving process I don't want to say could be, is challenging, difficult, hard.
It is, and it's especially hard for your listeners. my stories are crime thrillers.
Yeah.
And this series is titled Dark. Each one has the title Dark
Yeah.
in it for a
First one,
reason.
Dark Associate, and the new one, Dark Obsessions. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. So there is a side to that where it is hard, even though you've set this goal, to come back to that topic when you're processing those emotions yourself. So that becomes a challenge as well.
Would you say that any of that influenced you, you're in a, how do I want to say this? You're in a dark, a dark place when you lose somebody that you care about, or somebody gets a diagnosis, and oh boy, no filter between my brain and my mouth. So I'm sorry, but you could, I think, be in those feelings and write into your characters I hope you're okay. I say this, the darkness that you're feeling. Does that make sense at all? Again, as a non-writer.
Absolutely, Louis. And it's a very good insight, because to me in general, to be a good writer, you have to have empathy. You have to have,
I love that.
oddly, you have to have equal empathy for your protagonist and what has led them to the place where they are, as you have for your antagonist and what has led them to be who they are. So when you're trying to tie into those emotions and something overwhelming like that, towards the end of my first book, my father, who was obviously a big influence because he had been a police officer himself.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too. Go ahead.
Yeah, and he had worked undercover, and there were times I was, calling him up,
Right.
"Hey, Dad, what about this scene? What about that?" And unfortunately, he fell ill and passed away. And it was a very tough time. It was one of the hardest losses up into that point in my life that I had ever suffered. And sitting down to write these things, the determination and the fact that I knew that I told my dad I was going to do this, and I was, this is what we're going to do.
I see.
And kind of just saying, this is what we're going to do no matter how we feel today. And then on top of it, that when you're channeling those emotions yourself and understanding, again, that empathy, I think, as bad as it is, I think good art comes out of those situations, because in those extreme situations, we learn so much about ourselves and what we hold dear.
I certainly agree, and understand it when it's someone real close at a very deep level. I mean, I don't know, and I'm not going to ask you about losses that you had prior to your dad's, but it's when it's someone really close, you understand a lot of things about yourself and about death. And yeah, I think I better stop that in that direction. But I do want to talk about your family of law enforcers. I love that. Tell us.
So my father served in the San Francisco Police Department. My grandfather served in the San Francisco Police Department, and my great-grandfather served in the San Francisco Police Department. So there is a very long history,
Yeah.
A legacy, if you will.
And interesting how it's changed over the years, policing, et cetera. And I so admire people that go into law enforcement at any time, not just today, but, and I won't get political with you, but today more than ever, when too often police are said to be the bad guys when they're out there.
Louis,
yeah, I don't want to get political, but I'm very honest. I'm not going to get political, right? But I'm horrified by that and that attitude. Yeah, there's a couple of bad in every profession everywhere. Of course there are, but I just think that to be under the pressure and have to make split-second decisions, and I can't even imagine it again today more than ever. But interestingly enough, when I see certain police officers, I'll thank them. I used to walk really late at night, and sometimes really late at night. And I would see police officers, parked and watching. And I would, of course, shine my flashlight on myself, but well, look at me, do they want a guy looking like this running up to their car, sometimes barefoot, I dare say, weather dependent. And I would thank them, because if it wasn't, I know I'm bizarre. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do that. You can't do that. Again, locally, in the city, I mean, the shootings and the killings, and people blaming bad behavior on a gun as opposed to the person that pulled the trigger. I hope you don't mind that I'm going here. It's just, it's horrific. It's horrific what's going on, and young people getting killed, and there's the police officers doing the very best to do the very best that they can.
And I think it's a complex issue, because, whether you're talking about a religion that has bad actors, or you're
Sure.
talking about a school where there's been bad actors,
teacher,
or,
yeah.
Wherever it is, unfortunately, we have these, and this is one of the things that people say, well, why are your stories so dark, right? Why do you go to these places? And I go there because it exists, unfortunately,
Yes.
in our society. There are bad actors.
Yes.
And I try to explore some of that, because just like I said, I don't like to shy away from truth in many
Good for
ways.
you. Yeah.
And I think, one of the nice things in terms of feedback that I've had from folks is that my main character, Kate, one of the things I deal with a lot is the trauma and the cost of this job, because, and it's so many people, most people think it's, first responders, law enforcement. But there's a whole host of people. There's the crime scene investigators who come in. There's people who are processing the paperwork behind the scenes, who are seeing autopsy photos and being exposed to these things. There's photographer, there's all sorts of people that are impacted by these cases. And thank God for us that they're out there working.
Yes.
Because honestly, I don't think it's a job that I could, people have asked me, why didn't you go into that field? And it takes a toll on you. And there's some bells you cannot unring. And I had one situation where, just as a civilian, and this was related to my job, I ended up, there was a crime scene near one of our properties. And so I kind of had to interact with the medical examiner and the local law enforcement. And I remember walking away from that and saying to my husband, God bless these people, that they are dealing with this every day, and somehow they still get up and they have the strength to do it
again,
because it takes a toll.
Years ago, in a discussion with a therapist, was sharing with me, obviously no names, but about how she was impacted when police officers would come to talk for couples therapy, for individual therapy, and how badly she felt, for some of the suffering that they have. And then I was talking with her about what she does. I said, you've got people, I mean, I think about, again, I'm not comparing, contrasting or anything, just additionally, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, therapists, people aren't coming in, making an appointment, say, let me tell you how great my life is. Let me tell you, it's just fantastic. I don't know why I'm here talking to you, but it's great. I just wanted to tell you. That's not it. And like you say, the trauma, when you say about bad actors, as you call them, just the fact that there can be so many true crime, the TV shows like, 48 Hours, and I can't think of the name of some of the other ones where it's not dramatized, it's real. And the fact that they can fill so many hours, weeks, years of these programs, it's indicative. Again, we want to focus on positive, certainly, but we need to realize they're out there. People need to be aware and realize that. And again, these law enforcers that are out there, these police officers, you should, like you say, crime scene, the photographers, they're not out taking pictures of the daffodils that came up, or a beautiful tree, or, you know, the ocean. They're taking pictures of horrific crime scenes.
And there's so much about the nature of humans and how we function, how our biology even comes into play. We remember things, you know, you smell something, you walk into a farmer's market and you smell something and it takes you immediately back to
Yeah.
when you were 6 years old and your grandmother
Yeah.
took you to a similar place, and you feel that you're 6 years old again, completely in that moment. And so for as many good things that muscle memory and all of these different sensory things can bring back to us, they can also bring back other things that are pretty horrific. And so, yeah, it's something that I do grapple a lot with in the book, because it is a reality.
It's a reality. Again, the website is mariesutro.com. Marie Sutro. We've got links up at louisfreeshow.com and wfmj.com. Your new book, Dark Obsessions. I also love on your website that you promote, you certainly tell people where they're available, and you say local, you know, booksellers, the big booksellers, and the independents, and you urge people to, you let people know, and you've got the indie bound, and I like that. I've had authors on, and it's their call. My line is always, Marie, I say, the book is available everywhere and everywhere online. Please try to buy it as close to home as possible. If you have an independent bookseller there, but Barnes and Noble, and they are available, your books are available everywhere. But I've had some pushback from some authors that just want people to buy it on Amazon, so it goes up the and you know what? They're the author. It's their gig. Yet I still like to keep the bookstores open. I think, you know, you may go to Amazon, but you also might go to a Barnes and Noble and pick up your book. It's like, wow, check this out. So I really appreciate that you do that. I admire you for doing that.
Thank you. It's near and dear to my heart. I get my books everywhere. I get them from Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Sure.
indie bookstores. But when I was a kid, there was nothing like a trip to the bookstore and going in and being able to see the shelves. And there's so many books that I have bought, even though it is a very trite thing to say, and it's very horrible in many ways to judge a book by its cover. But there's so many times that I've looked at something and said, oh, what is this? I'm so intrigued. And, you know, that whole touch and
that experience,
tactile experience and the smell of books. There's really no replacement for it that I've found.
And I agree with you. I think to go into a bookstore, because I may be going in looking for something or some section. I have the same experience at the library also. And that's like, oh, what's that? What is that? Let me, and you know, and then you're into that, and you pick it, like you say, you see the cover, you pick it up, and you're intrigued by it. And that isn't available online. Yeah, you can read about it, you can read some, etc., but it's not. There's other books that are around when you're looking in a bookstore or library.
But thank goodness, you know, one thing I will say over the course of my lifetime with the emergence of online retailing, as a reader and a voracious reader, the online experience has opened me up to so many authors that I never, growing up, it just wasn't within reach between, like you said, the library on one side or your local bookseller. There, you never would know about some of these authors. So
I certainly agree. I agree. You find a lot of things online that you wouldn't be aware of. But again, that going to the library, going to a bookstore, that process of discovery where you're looking for one thing and you see other things. I obviously easily distracted, and it's like, oh, look at this. Oh, what about this one? Oh, yeah. That's why, very honestly, Marie, I of course look up words online. And the older I get, I'm obsessing. Am I using that word right? Simple words. I look up, am I using that word right or correctly or whatever? And some other words that I don't recognize, and I'll look up the definition. But having a physical dictionary for me is great, because then you see the words around it, and then might take you to I believe me, I can get lost in a physical dictionary. I can spend way too much time.
Well, you know, I go back again to the old days, right? Where the dictionary had the little notches for each
Yes. Yeah.
letter.
Yeah.
And there was something magic, just like the old rotary phone, when
Yeah.
you stuck your finger in that little hole to crank the wheel around. There was something magic. There was anticipation in that of who you were going to call, and
Yeah.
it was going to take you a while,
It took,
right?
yeah. Yeah. You had to pause. You
Yes,
had to
and
slow down a little bit.
yeah, and the dictionary was the same way. Those little notches, sticking your fingertip in there and
Yeah.
getting ready to flip it over and then search
Searching for the word.
alphabetically for your
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
There's magic in that.
Yeah. And I agree. I'm surprised that you know about rotary phones.
Oh, believe me.
Okay.
There's been a lot of living, Louis.
I'm surprised. I got to understand, the push button phones, but I'm surprised. It's great. That's great. It's great. I have to say, you live, Marie. I love this. You live in Northern California with your husband under the loving reign of 3 well-loved cats who specialize, I love your style of writing, in pioneering inventive ways to energize the home office environment. I love that line.
Yeah,
Tell me about the cats.
Yeah, they are fun. It is, some days it is all about peace and love and harmony in the most blissful Zen way that you could imagine. And then in the next minute, it can turn into a 3-ring circus of insane proportion.
But entertaining.
It is very entertaining. Always.
A couple of things I want to say, and I loved we open with the acknowledgements. Sometimes I had Dr. Franz de Waal on yesterday, who does a lot of primate research, Mama's Last Hug, his new book, Different, about gender and primates. And he's a primatologist, great word. And the acknowledgements were in the back of the book. And I was referencing them with him on the show. And he said, well, I'm going to have to tell my wife that you read the acknowledgements because she says only women read the acknowledgements. So I love that you put it in the front of the book too, and hopefully people will read them, because your attitude of gratitude, as they said on the SpongeBob episode. I know, what's an old guy like me? It's, I used to have other ways of getting out of my reality. We won't mention, other ways to get out of my reality. And what I love about, it's a sponge that lives in a pineapple under the sea. What's more out of reality than that? But there was a section about a song in one of the episodes, Attitude of Gratitude. And your attitude of gratitude in the acknowledgements, and you write so beautifully. Some people list them, and that's great. Again, I'm not comparing, contrasting, but it was wonderful how you write, and it's obviously from your heart, and that sense of gratitude is real. It was beautiful.
Thank you. There's a lot of debate in the publishing industry about, where do you put the acknowledgements? Do you allow people the instant gratification of jumping into the book so that you don't lose them?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's a science to that, right? How every time they flip a page, how many seconds do you have to keep them interested and all of that sort of thing. But for me, it is very important because, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I am one person trying to give voice to art, but I can't do it on my own. And I will always be grateful. And I think that's part of the journey of loss, is embracing gratitude. At least that's one of the big lessons I've learned.
And I love how you wrote about your husband and his patience in reading your books and working with you. I love that. But you also say in the acknowledgements, a special expression of gratitude for all those who invest the time. I love that, to read my stories and have supported me along the way. Without you, your imagination and interest, there is no magic.
And it's functionally true, right? I can put words on a page, but until someone begins to read them and uses their imagination, it's almost like, for example, my main character, Kate, it's almost like I've created this automaton and it sits quietly in the corner until someone breathes the life of magic into it. And it truly is a partnership. Every time a reader reads it, they're bringing my story to life as much as I am.
That's beautiful. Also, your dedication to the survivors. I hope this isn't too weird of an interview, because I would think when publicists send out the 10 questions, so why did and they're good questions. I'm sure you hear them over and over. And again, I'm not here. I'm going to say it again, comparing, contrasting, that one is better than the other, but it's interesting when I read dedications. Some dedications are very, dedicated to RJ or whatever. And of course, I ask the author if they are will they tell me who RJ is. Yours is to the survivors of violent crimes. Your strength is our hope. What a beautiful dedication.
That was really important to me because the nature of this story, not to spoil it for anyone, but my main character is going through a lot of trauma, as I mentioned. She's coming off of her first big case as a rookie detective, where she was pitted against an insidious serial killer. And the case was very difficult, and it opened up some old wounds for her. So she travels to Washington State to look up her mother and to try to resolve some things that she thought she had resolved, but really hadn't. And while she's there, a body is discovered in the woods. And the longer she, the local law enforcement asks her to come help. And she does. And during the process of the investigation, she uncovers a sex trafficking ring. And, this book, my first book, when you are looking at victims of violent crime, it is a very hard thing, especially the nature of the research for this book. My first book was very, very hard. Some of the things that I delved into, and this book was no different. There were many times where I had to pause, literally reading something or reviewing photos or listening to interviews or calling people and interviewing them, where I just needed a mental break because it would break me. And the things that people go through and the strength that they have every day to get up after they've been through some of these horrific things, it is a miracle to me. And I just, there's perseverance in the human soul that I think so many of us, when we're just, running and hustling every day to go to our job and run to the grocery store and do this and that, I think we never really know what we're capable of. And there is some extreme resilience and beauty in the human soul that I just don't think that we spend enough time in society realizing just what people have inside of them.
Yeah, we don't, and I think it's so much, I hate to say worse today, but with the immediacy, with everybody looking down at their cell phones and everybody's in a hurry. And I always wonder, where are you going? I mean, again, some people, in fairness, may be thinking they're going to be late to work, and they going to get a coffee or something, and they're kind of, I hate to use the word anxious, but a little, concerned that they're so leave a little earlier tomorrow or whatever. But I don't understand what people are doing and what the rush is, and just, let somebody out in traffic, and the person behind you the arms are up and they're beeping at you. It's like, you let one person, if everybody lets one person in, then everything's cool. But I think that what you're saying really speaks to your empathy. And again, you're good time-wise, because we're okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the We Be Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland, copyright Be Free Radio Limited, 2022, produced by Love the Miss Bunny Face in cooperation with White Rabbit Productions. I don't think I need the adult disclaimer. Well, just in case. The We Be Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland, is an adult-oriented show intended only for a mature adult audience. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In other words, if you can't hang, drop off now. And I am with Marie, her new book, Dark Obsessions, her first book, Dark Associations. It's great. When you were saying that, I think earlier, or just before the idea disclaimer, it speaks to your empathy. So I'm very interested, and the older I get, the more I'm interested in, is where do you think? And I know this is when I ask myself this question, where do you think the empathy comes from? It's challenging to answer. You can guess, nature, nurture, experience, whatever, how you handled experiences. Where do you think your empathy? You've got a lot of empathy. It's very, very clear. Where do you think that comes from?
That's one of the best questions I've ever been asked, Louis.
Oh, can I quote you? I want to
No,
quote you.
It really is. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. I don't think in my life. So I have to say,
I'm sincerely interested because of your level of empathy. And I'm also quoting you on, to be a good writer, you must have empathy. I love that.
Well, I do not want to come off as if I am the most empathetic person, because
you are very you've got, it's clear you've got a lot of empathy.
Well, I think it's probably a combination of nature and nurture. And the reason I say that is because I am fresh off the heels of listening to yesterday's show. And I did think your guest was absolutely fascinating. And what he was talking about, how, the way that he was saying it is so hard to divorce.
Oh, yeah. Franz de Waal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how hard it is to divorce nature and nurture. And how do you really study that? Because you'd have to go back in time and take people out of their family of origin. You'd have to, put them in a glass bubble in order to have that control group. So it is a hard question, and how much of that comes from our DNA. I like to think that it is because I came from some good people who showed me that this is what we do. We don't walk by, we don't have, for example, on a really silly light level, if you have a party and you invite people to your home, make them feel welcome, make everyone feel welcome. And if you see someone at the party who's not getting a chance to talk or is not, then go get them and bring them into the conversation. And so those were things that on the nurture side were very important and were taught to me in many ways. And as I've grown older, I've had so many good examples of good people that I've come across in my life. So again, I'm not sure that you can divorce the two, but at the same time, I do see the impact of a lot of that in my life.
Yeah, and I think also, and I think you would agree, when someone has been empathetic, when someone has shown you empathy and you feel it, you want others. Most people, I would think, would want others to feel that, and so I get it, because again, with Franz de Waal talking about that nature versus nurture and some of the things, and maybe a hybrid of that. I don't know, but I appreciate what you're saying about that. And I hear from a lot of people that they feel it was the way they were raised. Yet some people that were raised in a harsh environment can become very empathetic, and other people could have an experience that turns them cold.
Yes, which is a fascinating dynamic, right? Because there is that whole question of free will, right? How do you respond to the things that are done to you? Do you feel aggrieved every day, or do you take some of that and use it in positive ways to make your experience and that of others better?
And I wonder sometimes when I've seen true crime stories or read about true crime, and you hear of someone that had a bad experience as a child and then choose to hurt others. One of the things that always is disturbing to me, and my fantasy of being a judge in a case where I don't have to follow the law, the sentencing guidelines, when someone would say I'm sorry. When someone would say that they had, I'm overtime, that's why I'm managing a couple others, I'm sorry. But when someone would say they molested a child, and then they make their statement and say, well, I was molested as a kid. And I would, as that judge, like to say, So how did that make you feel? Tell me about that. Oh, it was horrible. I mean, sure. I mean, can't be molested as a kid and not have a horrible experience. So you chose to impose that on someone else. I was going to sentence you to 50 years, but I'm sentencing you 100 years, no parole, no, because you know what that felt like. You know that, and people choose. And on the other side, people can be very empathetic and very protective of others and children because they know the hell of the abuse.
Yeah,
So
and
it is a choice.
it's interesting how human behavior works. I got into that a lot in my first book. Um, Killers who are made.
Dark associations.
Yes,
Available
killers who
everywhere online. And your website before you.
mariesutro.com.
Okay.
But it's interesting because you look at that and you say, are they made, are killers, some of these horrible killers, some of these worst perpetrators in our society, are they made or are they born? Again, nature versus nurture. And I think it's a very interesting question. I think are we ever going to find the answer in our lifetimes?
Yeah.
I am not convinced of that. But the one thing that I think it tells us is how important the role of parenting is and how important it is to take care of our children and put them in, it all ties back, Louis, to what we talked about earlier. Put them in a position to make a play in their life and be the best version of themselves and, be the best partner in society that they can be. So it really always, that's where I always come back to is if we could just do a better job with the kids, we'd save a lot of society's ills because some of them are made. It's just true.
Yeah. And again, good parenting, sometimes it's the lack of parenting where their kids are sadly raising themselves. And again, when I hear some of the crimes, even here where I'm at, headlines today about shootings, one dead and a child was hurt, and just the indiscriminate shooting that are going on, that's a way to solve. And I'm very interested in the backgrounds. I'd love to have somebody kind of delve into but they're still children, teenagers, well, not children per se, but teenagers. What was going on with them? How are they raised or not raised? And when I hear that more and more, I'm hearing that shootings are teenagers. I saw in the news last night of teenagers were fighting near a little league game, and shots rang out, and all the kids. I mean, it's just.
But Louis, it's interesting too because I think when we talk about parenting, there's also that concept of it taking a village, and I think there are situations where parents are doing their best and maybe things are happening they truly don't know their child's being exposed to. So that's where you look at it and kind of back to the party analogy, right? It's incumbent on the host to do that. But hey, if you're at the party and you see somebody that's over in the corner and no one's talking to them, does it really hurt you to go over there for 5 seconds? So, as much as we can do to support each other as a society and as a collective, it just makes us all better. So, I like that there's that new little tagline that you hear a lot now: see something, say something.
Say something.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
It certainly is. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. But if you don't say, wouldn't you, I would think it would, I'd say eat someone alive. It's like, well, I saw, but I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to, it's like, I think that would, I hate to say worse than being wrong, but if you did, and they come, no, this was what was going on, and everything gets cleared up. And I'm sure there's times that doesn't work out that way. Nonetheless, to try to turn away from something that you think is going on where a child or someone is being hurt or neglected or whatever, to say something, anonymously, not anonymously, however, there's all kinds of avenues to do that. I want to talk with you about Sisters in Crime. It's like, I love the name. And then I went to the website and learned more about it. And you're a sister in crime, right?
I am, and I am very proud to be so. I actually just came off of serving on the board of one of my local chapters, And it has been a wonderful organization. It was actually founded back in the day when there were not many female voices in the crime genre, when it was predominantly a male genre for all male writers. And it has always had that, that goal of bringing lesser heard voices to the fore. And so now that we do have so many great voices, female voices in fiction, the organization has really stepped up and is carrying out that goal of making sure underrepresented voices are heard everywhere. So it is a wonderful, wonderful group. They provide resources to writers, networking opportunities, all sorts of support. Just really a wonderful, great group.
And when I went to the website, I also saw the library. We love libraries, newsletters and sections. And as we were talking earlier, I love my library. I think libraries are, again, our areas has phenomenal library system, just phenomenal. I know a lot of areas, of course, do, because but libraries are just fantastic and great resources. And now with technology for everything, they seem to always be so up to date, way ahead of me, and so many things. Tell me about that, the libraries, loving libraries.
It's interesting. I have that childhood that I talked about, Encyclopedia Brown, all the books. My school had a little library in it, and they were great about always bringing in the Newbery Award winners. And it was a wonderful, wonderful, tiny little library, but they were always bringing in new materials. And even my local community library, I would go down there, and there's, again, the magic of a bookstore, the magic of a library, and the community aspect of a library that you get, and that special hushed vibe. There's something very, very special about libraries to me. And years ago, back when I was still in my corporate life, I saw a local spot on a woman who was volunteering through the California library system, and she was teaching adults how to read and write. And most people think, well, if you're an adult, then you know how to read and write, but that is not the case for a variety of reasons. Sometimes childhood illness, lots of things that are beyond people's control. They do not get the level of education that they should, so that if they have to take their child in and read a prescription and or get them to a certain floor on a hospital ward, they're not at that level so that they can do those types of things in their life. And I was so inspired by that story that later on, when I had a chance, I became a tutor at the library system, helping adults learn to read. And it's a larger issue than people think. It's estimated that there's around 36 million people in the United States who function
illiterate
under that kind of third grade level. And I just think reading has brought so much to my life, and functionally we need it, right? To get by. And it's to me, volunteering, that's one of the most important things I've ever done, because we should be sharing information. And that's the first thing we need to share with each other, is the reading and the writing.
And you can explore anything, everything, if you can read. I love that you volunteered with California Library Literacy Services. It's troubling to me that in 2022, I don't want to say I can get it. When I was young, 50 years ago, there were people that may not have been in school, they were working, they were labor, whatever. And now, 50 years later, I'm surprised, disappointed that it's still happening. I spoke with a school teacher recently, and she was telling me that they keep moving the kids forward, whether they're reading at grade level or not. And she had a student who was in the 4th grade that was reading at kindergarten level. And how do you catch up? What do we do? We give them a diploma that they can't read? I'm horrified by that. And then when did they learn to read? So I think it's wonderful that you're helping adults
Well, it's
read.
also, you look back at the history of the human experience on this planet, and for so long, reading and writing was outside of the grasp of the average person. And it is such a powerful, powerful tool in our lives. It's so transformative, and it is so necessary, right, for
Yes.
us just to
Yeah.
function, that, I look at it and I say, hey, that's one of the greatest gifts that any of us can give away, is that skill that so many of us have.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful gift we can share
Yeah.
with other people.
Yeah, and they've got great literacy programs at our library here. But one of the things that it makes me think when I hear that they're not teaching cursive in many schools, I'm thinking now for us old people, it's going to be the secret way to communicate with each other. And I also have an I love my library shirt in cursive. I only have one of those. Yeah. And I thought, are there really kids that can't read this now? Again, I'm not sure how some of the decisions are made and what you teach and what you don't. I don't know how they sign their name if they're not taught cursive. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's an
Yeah, so
electronic
many
signature
things,
that they use. I don't know.
yeah, so many things change over time. As much as I love books, that breaks down to my love of words, why I love dictionaries too. And it's not just the look of the word on the page, it's also the pronunciation of it. I
Yes.
am a word nerd. I love accents. I love hearing people with
Yeah.
accents and trying to pick
As do
apart
I.
vowel
Yeah.
and consonant sounds and
Yeah.
all of that fun stuff. And to me, cursive is one of the most magical things, and it tells you so much about someone's personality too. And it's not always right. You can't always judge a book by its cover or someone by their cursive, but it's really funny to see how unique it is and how specific it is to someone's experience, the way that they write cursive.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I had a guest on years ago that wrote a book about handwriting analysis. And again, I not sure that I buy into all of it. Can you really, because I was never wrote in an attractive way, but I wrote, but my handwriting has just deteriorated terribly over the years to where I started to print most things that I need. And then now it's sometimes difficult to read my printing, but I do. And I love words too. I texted a few people a couple of weeks ago. I always love finding new words. Problem is I don't remember them a lot, but hapex legomenon, it's a word or phrase that appears only once in a manuscript, document, or particular area of literature. I'll probably never be able to, wouldn't you love, I would love to be able to insert it in a conversation sometime just for fun. I sent some text messages out to friends. I said, as this point moving forward, I will be known as hapex legomenon. So, it's just fascinating that the words, and I love that too. I guess I would be a word nerd also.
Yeah, and I actually in fifth grade, I was in your same world, Louis, where my writing was not legible, and my fifth grade teacher told me a fib, but it was a motivating fib. She told me I would not graduate on to, for me, middle school was sixth grade.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would not graduate if I did not improve my cursive. And I will tell you, it was a big motivator, and that cursive got much better.
Yeah, and that I hear that. That's a good motivator. I think that's, and the interaction that the teacher had with you. Same thing. I always got D's. They wouldn't fail me, but I got D's. They actually, that's interesting because I'm just thinking they don't have that anymore. Writing. I don't think you get a grade for writing anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But I passed, but with a D. It was always, and now
a
it's an
win
F.
is a win, right?
Yes. A win is a win. Now I'm sure it's F minus, if just a zero, just a zero. You get great praise for your books. If you can stay another, you good till the bottom of the hour. So I'm loving the conversation with you, Marie Sutro. The award, the praise. I mean, the awards and praise that you've had and are getting for your new book that you've had for Dark Associations. How does that feel?
It's a little bit surreal sometimes, because when you have dreams and something that matters so much to you, as I said, even being a word nerd and caring about printing in cursive and all of these things, when you care about something and it's meant so much to you, everyone talks about this, and sometimes it sounds played out, but it's very true. No matter what I'm going through in my life, I can step through a looking glass and I can become anyone at any time, anywhere. I can break the bonds of time and space. I can I can transcend, and I can be another species. I can do all sorts of things. So that magic has always been so special to me, and I have always elevated it in my mind. And to have people who I respect so very much in the industry come back and say, hey, you got a little bit of a wand there, miss. You using a wand. So hey, it means the world to me.
Some of the praise is much more than you got a little bit of a wand there. So it's great. And I appreciate your humility, but it's fantastic reading what people say about your books. When you say that about creating, worlds, and I've got to ask you, and I know we touched on it earlier, about sometimes it's so dark that you need to get out of that world with what you write. Correct? I know we touched on it. So how do you balance that?
It's a very hard thing, because people say, well, why do it? Why not just write in the mystery genre? There's kind of my side on one end of the spectrum, and then there's the cozy mysteries on the other side, which are, for most listeners who don't know, if you think of the show that used to be on Murder, She Wrote. The main character was Jessica Fletcher. It was a great show. It's one of my favorites, actually, and I love it. But in that show, and kind of in the cozy genre, they treat a body like, oh, this guy died, and oops, that's sad, but let's go, there's going to be a dinner, a lunch party today, and we're all going to go hang out, and we're all going to be happy, and we're going to do this, and oh, there's cupcake baking, and there's this and that, and there's all these happy, fun, light things. And it's wonderful. It's about puzzle solving and everything, but there is an approach that a body is almost a thing. And oh, it's a shame this person died, and oh, that's sad, but it's not the main crux of the story. And for me, any kind of violent crime, especially murder, it is an attack against humanity, and it is something that should always be seen as an egregious act. And so I feel that in order to write these topics, I have to be fair and true. I have to be true about the people who commit these crimes, the people who are victims of the crimes, and the people who go to investigate them and try to bring justice in the wake of them. So that darkness, I do sometimes have to walk away, but at the end of the day, I do a lot of the things that it sounds like you do, Louis. SpongeBob is not my jam, but
well, the new ones they've ruined the new ones. The old ones, I know it sounds terrible, but since the creator passed away, it's been outsourced, and I can't watch the new ones. Sorry.
Well, no,
what's your
okay.
escape?
I do all sorts of fun things. I do old B horror movies from the 50s that are just so
any
campy.
favorites? Any favorites?
Oh goodness, The Wasp Woman.
Oh God, yeah.
I don't know if you remember that one where she ran the company.
Do I remember? Yeah. That's I love. I love the black and white.
Those are great, and they're so innocuous and silly, and sometimes the more extreme ones, you can actually see the person wearing the costume and see their feet as they're walking. Totally cheese, totally campy. And there's some really great horror hosts out there still in local broadcasting that just make it all the more fun to watch. And so I'll do that. I also run to the world of cartoons. So
any favorites?
Oh goodness, because of course, being a mystery person, Scooby-Doo is one. So I have to
That's
say.
great.
Yeah, and the older, the better. All the originals, I kind of know all of them by heart, but I could watch them a million times and never have
That's
a
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's, I agree. It's just like, when you mentioned that, now I'm thinking I haven't seen the original Invisible Man in a long time. And I've got to watch that. When you
And
said that
all,
about I mean, yeah, not necessarily a B movie, but just some of the, oh God, some of the great ones that came out of the UK, with Christopher Lee, the
Hammer,
different
the Hammer films.
the Hammer films. Yeah. 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 They're fantastic. And some of them it's difficult. I can't watch Bride of Frankenstein because it's too sad. It's too sad for me. It's weird. I watched it when I was young, and certain ones are too sad, or you don't want to see the end, or
Yes, and for me, even Frankenstein, there were so many issues. Sometimes we look at some of those movies and we think, oh, those are just old, silly movies. They're
yeah.
not as
Oh no.
compelling or as gripping or fast paced as they are today. But there's some serious. When Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, some of the
Yeah.
issues that are
Yes.
addressed in that are heart-wrenching issues. And it's not just, so many people talk about the little girl in the well scene
Yeah.
from Frankenstein.
Which is fantastic. Yeah.
It really is. But when you look at all of these characters that were created, there's so many layers to them. And I just think for anyone who hasn't really kind of gone back to the old black and whites, do it someday on a Saturday if you're sick or you're tired.
No,
Flip one of those. It's worth it.
I agree with you, Marie. And I have a friend, a close friend of mine. He always said, he'll say, Louis, have you ever watched, I'll tell him, you got to watch this, or Grand Hotel, or is coming on Turner Classic. I don't know if you've seen that. I love that movie. And he'll say to me, have you ever seen a movie that was actually made in color? Because all the movies I'm always suggesting to him, he'll suggest new movies, and I'm always saying, oh, you got to see this, or you got to see The Invisible Man, for example. And he always asks me if I've ever seen a movie in color. The weird thing when you get my age is I'll see Turner Classic Movies will have a movie like from the 70s. And the first time it's like, what do they have that? What do they have that? That's more recent. And I'm told, no, that was, 45 years ago or whatever. It's like, wow, that's a stunner.
I am in that zone where one thing after another now is the 40th anniversary, and I'm thinking that can't be the 40th anniversary because I remember that.
Yeah,
so
yeah, oh.
that's a problem.
wait, wait till you get my age. You hear that, it's like, yeah, the t-shirts of from the 80s, and it's like, well, the 80s wasn't that long. Oh yes, it was. Kirkus Review says an especially gripping, well-researched tale from a formidable talent. Wow. Yeah.
That was very, very kind. Very kind praise.
I think that's very accurate, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you. You wrote it. So, and as someone who's never written a book, I've got to believe you're putting together, at least in your head, the next book.
I am actually actively working on the next book, and I have a few other projects in the pipeline too. But
I'm sure you do.
Yes, I do. But the third book in the Kate Barnes series is well underway.
Well, any idea of when?
I am hoping that maybe towards the end of next year, but
Wow.
There's bigger, as I've learned during the pandemic, it's never good to prognosticate anymore because who knows what can happen, right?
That's right. That's right. You are absolutely wonderful. I've loved this conversation. Again, like you say about spoilers and with the book, for me, it's such a pleasure and joy to find out who wrote the book. That's the one thing, you don't find out in reading the book. Obviously, it's not an autobiography. To find out about you and get to learn about you. And it's been wonderful experience for me.
Well,
I hope it
thank you.
wasn't too wacky for you.
Absolutely not.
Disjointed.
Absolutely not, Louis. Like I said, from B-rated horror movies to old
Yeah.
60s and 70s cartoons, there's nothing too wacky over here. But thank you so much for giving me the time
Thank you.
today. I really appreciate all your
Thank you.
insightful questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Again, you know, I always look at some of my notes and the pages that are turned down in the book, and I don't follow them. I don't know why I even do it anymore. But again, your website?
mariesutro.com.
mariesutro.com. We've got it linked up. Go directly to it. The book available everywhere and everywhere online. Please try to buy it. Thank you for letting me say this, as close to home as possible. Again, even the Barnes and Nobles, I say, because people say, oh, you say that that's a chain. They put buildings, they rent or buy property in your community. And who are they hiring? Those aren't people from far away. Those are people in your community that are there. So the Barnes and Nobles, the independents, you can do from IndieBound and Amazon and all the other places online. Certainly, you know, I'm not anti-Amazon. I learned during the pandemic when I had an author on, and then I got an email like the next day, and someone said, I'm so excited. I got the book, and the bookstores were closed. How did you get it? I still don't know. That's still that's a mystery for me. Are they listening to your thoughts? I mean, and getting it ready, and they're down the street. So when you order it, but it's wonderful. And it's a wonderful thing also for people that can't get out. It's wonderful. It's at your door quickly. I don't know if they still do the next day. I don't know. Do they?
Yes,
they do.
Depending on whether you're signed up or not for next day, but yes, yeah. Or you want to pay for next day. Yes.
But available everywhere, Amazon, everywhere online, and of course, locally at your bookstore. Marie Sutro's Dark Obsessions, also Dark Association too. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Wonderful.
Thank you, Louis.
How wonderful, ladies and gentlemen. Again, the website is mariesutro.com, mariesutro.com.